The war had drained every soldier's spirit, and Lieutenant Marcus Hale was no exception. He stood quietly on the edge of the ruined forward base on the planet Virexa, the sky still stained with black smoke from last week's orbital strikes. Most of his unit was relieved to have survived the last battle, eager to rest or rotate back to safer sectors, but not Marcus. When the command center assigned him a low-priority mission rescue a potential alien civilian hidden somewhere in the abandoned Threxel ruins, everyone laughed. No one believed there was anyone left alive in that place, and most didn't care. The Threxel were strange, soft-spoken beings who had once shared trade and knowledge with humanity before the war tore everything apart. But when the Threxel refused to pick sides, both the enemy and allied factions turned against them. Most were killed, some vanished, and others, well, the records grew cold. Marcus didn't fully understand why this mission pulled at him, but something about the vague report, small life signs, erratic signals, and cave movement kept him awake. Maybe it was the dream that haunted him the night before deployment, a little girl with wide, glowing eyes, crying in silence beneath layers of stone. Marcus and a 4-man team landed near the last known location, just outside the ravaged cliffs of the Arkan Valley, a place once filled with Threxel temples and peaceful settlements. Now, it was just dust, broken metal, and long-dead machines. With rifles drawn and scanners active, the team moved through the debris. Hours passed with nothing but silence and shadows, until they entered a narrow cave hidden behind a collapsed building. Inside, the air changed, warmer, stale, and somewhere in the darkness, a faint scratching noise echoed. Marcus signaled the others to stay back and moved forward alone, flashlight cutting through layers of dust and cobweb structures. Then he saw tiny footprints in the dirt, too small to be an adult's, and a crude drawing on the wall, a tall figure with outstretched arms next to a smaller one. His heart pounded. This wasn't a tomb. Someone had been living here. He crept further in, passing broken food containers, a makeshift bed of old thermal blankets, and bits of alien clothing. Suddenly, from the shadows, a shape darted. Marcus raised his weapon but froze when he saw her, thin, trembling, covered in dirt and old fabric, her large violet eyes locked onto his. A child, no more than 6 or 7 in human years, though he knew Threxel aged differently. She didn't speak, didn't scream, just stared, too scared to move. Marcus lowered his rifle and slowly removed his helmet, showing her his face. "It's okay," he whispered gently. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't respond, but her breathing slowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ration bar, breaking it in half and placing it on the ground before sliding it toward her. She hesitated, then crawled forward and took it. When she ate, tears welled in her eyes, but she still didn't say a word. Marcus didn't push her, he simply extended a gloved hand. She stared at it for a long moment, then, cautiously, placed her tiny hand in his. Back at the surface, the team stared in disbelief as Marcus emerged from the cave with the girl in his arms. She held onto him tightly, her face buried in his chest. No one said anything. There were no cheers, no comments, just stunned silence. The war had taken so much from everyone, but in that moment, something had been given back. Marcus didn't know who the girl was, or if her family still lived, but he knew one thing for sure: this mission wasn't meaningless. She was proof that hope had survived, even here, in the darkest ruins of a forgotten war. As their transport ship lifted off, Marcus sat beside her, and though she never spoke, her eyes followed his every movement, like she had already decided he could be trusted. The others in the crew, hardened veterans of countless battles, began glancing her way too, not with suspicion, but with quiet awe. In a universe filled with destruction, they had found something precious, a life still untouched by hatred. But none of them knew then that this child's story was just beginning, and Marcus's decision to save her would change everything. The transport ship hummed softly as it cut through space, but inside the quiet medical bay, Lieutenant Marcus Hale sat beside the small Threxel girl, watching her breathe as she lay curled in a blanket far too big for her. She had not spoken a single word since he rescued her, not even after hours of gentle questions, warm food, or soft reassurances. The other soldiers on board gave her space, unsure how to act around a child who had survived alone in a dead zone for 2 years, but Marcus stayed close, sensing that she needed something deeper than words: safety, trust, patience. Every now and then she would glance at him with those deep violet eyes, filled with quiet understanding and sorrow far beyond her years. The ship say I began scanning her for identification, trying to match her genetic signature with any remaining Threxel records in the Galactic database, but nothing returned. It was as if she had been forgotten by the stars themselves. Marcus didn't like that. He believed every life should leave a trace, especially one that had suffered in silence for so long. As the ship docked at the orbital station Valen 3, they were met by cold officials and stiff medical staff, more interested in the strange alien child as a case than a person. Marcus growled when one of them suggested she might be a useful subject for study. That night, he moved her from the medical ward to his private quarters, a clear breach of protocol, but no one stopped him. The crew had seen the way she clung to him when strangers came close. She trusted him, and he was not going to betray that. In the dim light of his quarters, Marcus tried again, showing her pictures of Threxel art, old cultural recordings, even holograms of pre-war cities she might recognize. She remained silent, unmoving, her expression blank but watching. Then he played a soft melody, a lullaby recorded decades ago from a Threxel ambassadorial mission. The moment the song began, her eyes changed, her fingers twitched. She turned her head slowly toward the sound, and for the first time, tears rolled down her cheeks. Marcus said nothing, afraid to scare the moment away. When the music ended, she whispered a name so soft he thought he imagined it. Siren. That one word struck him like lightning. Siren, a name buried in his memory from years ago, a Threxel diplomat who once stood beside humans during early negotiations. Someone who disappeared when the war turned violent. Could this girl be her daughter? Marcus stayed awake through the night, digging through archived reports, mission logs, and restricted files. He found a reference to Serenale, a captured Threxel negotiator who was labeled a political threat and imprisoned on a deep space station known as Penner 6. No trial, no release date. Just a name and a file that ended in silence. It had been over 5 years. If the child was hers, then she had been alone almost her entire life. The next morning, Marcus asked her gently, Siren, is that your mother? She looked at him, blinked slowly, then nodded once before returning to silence. That was all he needed. He submitted a request for a humanitarian mission to verify the records, to see if Siren was still alive, but command denied it within an hour. Case closed, they said. Prisoners of that category were classified unrecoverable. Marcus felt fury rise inside him, but he hid it well. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply began to plan. That night, while the rest of the crew rested, he approached his trusted engineer and pilot, two friends who had seen too much war to care about rules anymore. Without needing much explanation, they agreed to help. Marcus had never gone rogue before, but for the first time, he believed breaking orders was the only right choice. They modified a scout ship, masked the destination logs, and launched quietly with the girl aboard. She didn't speak again during the journey, but she began to hum the melody he had played before, soft and haunting, like a voice echoing through time. It sent chills through him every time he heard it, and though she never smiled, Marcus could tell something in her had changed, like a quiet hope had been lit inside her. He didn't know what they would find on Penner 6. The place had a dark reputation, a forgotten moon orbiting a dead planet, used as a prison for those too dangerous or too important to set free. Officially, it didn't even exist on most maps. As they neared the coordinates, the ship's systems began to glitch. as if the prison was actively trying to stay hidden. But Marcus had come too far to turn back. He would find Saren. If she still lived, he would bring this child back to her mother, even if it cost him his career, his freedom, or worse. In his heart, he knew the girl's silence was not weakness, it was survival. And now, because she had spoken one name, Marcus would do what no soldier had dared to do before. He would break into a ghost prison, cross forbidden lines, and shine a light into the galaxy's darkest corner, not for glory, not for duty, but for a little girl who had already lost too much. The small scout ship drifted quietly through uncharted space, its lights dimmed, its systems masked to avoid detection as it neared the forbidden zone known only to a few as Penrith Ixa, prison moon that officially didn't exist, hidden by war-era firewalls, misinformation, and fear. Lieutenant Marcus Hale stood at the controls, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the dead gray surface below where no starships landed willingly. Behind him, the Threxel girl sat silently, legs curled under her, staring out the window with unreadable eyes. The name she had whispered Saren still echoed in Marcus's mind, pulling him deeper into this mission that had already crossed the line between duty and desperation. Files had confirmed it. Serenale had been labeled a diplomatic threat, not for anything she had done, but for refusing to choose a side in the war. She was imprisoned for peace, not violence. Marcus couldn't let that truth stay buried, not while her daughter sat only feet away from him, still voiceless, but watching every movement. As the ship descended, the security net surrounding the moon flared to life. Automated warnings crackled through the system. Unauthorized approach detected, withdraw immediately, but Marcus had come prepared. He fed the computer, a hacked diplomat override code stolen from a buried archive, and hoped the old encryption still worked. The prison gates responded slowly, their systems old and rusted, but they opened just wide enough for the ship to slip through. The moon's surface was barren, cold, and colorless, broken only by the faint glimmer of buried towers and hidden infrastructure. Marcus landed in a docking bay covered in dust and silence. There were no guards, only machines silent, watchers with lifeless eyes, and corridors filled with dim light and stale air. The girl followed Marcus closely, never touching him, but never falling more than a step behind. She didn't flinch at the strange metal doors or blinking security eyes. She just kept walking, her face calm, like she had already accepted whatever waited here. Marcus had one name and one mission: find Serenale, but the prison had no directory, no visible records, only a central AI system that spoke in dry, cold responses. Query: Detainee Serenale, Marcus said into the terminal. The response came after a long pause. Subject located: Sector 7L, Cryocell 14, Cryo. Marcus clenched his fists. They had kept her in stasis all this time, frozen between seconds while the galaxy moved on. He ran through the long metal halls, the girl keeping pace without a word, and reached the locked sector. A large mechanical door barred the way, requiring multiple clearances. Marcus used the override again, forcing the system to recognize him as a diplomatic attach. The door opened with a heavy groan, revealing a dark chamber filled with pods, dozens of them lined in perfect rows. Most were dark, inactive, with no lights, no sounds, no signs of life. But one pod in the center glowed faintly. Cryocell 14. He approached it slowly, hands shaking now, his breath catching in his throat. Inside the pod, through the thick frost-covered glass, was a Threxel woman with gentle features and closed eyes. Her body hadn't aged, her skin still shimmered, faintly with her species' natural glow. Marcus tapped the screen beside the pod. Status: alive, stable, frozen 5.7 years. Marcus stared at the pod, then turned to the girl, who stood silently at his side. Is this her? He asked softly. She stepped forward, placed one small hand on the glass, and whispered, Mama. It was the second word she had spoken since they met. Marcus's heart twisted. He activated the release sequence, and steam hissed from the pod as ancient locks disengaged and warmth began to fill the chamber. Alarms chirped softly, signaling life returning to the frozen woman. Slowly, her fingers twitched, her breathing deepened, and her eyes opened to bright orbs filled with confusion, fear, and pain. She looked around, disoriented, her body trembling from stasis shock. Then her gaze landed on the child. She blinked. Once. Then again. "Lyra," she gasped, her voice weak but clear. The girl nodded and stepped closer, and without another word, Siren reached out with shaking arms, pulling her daughter into a trembling embrace. They didn't cry loudly or speak much. They just held each other as if the years and pain and silence between them had never existed. Marcus turned away to give them privacy, but the sound of soft sobs reached his ears anyway, gentle and quiet, but filled with everything that had been lost. He let them stay like that as long as they needed. Later, Siren tried to stand, but fell, and Marcus caught her. "You're safe," he said gently. "She's safe." Siren looked at him, her face filled with confusion. "Who are you?" He hesitated. "A soldier," he replied. "But today, I'm just someone who brought your daughter home." The words hit her like a wave, and she nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." But the moment of peace was short-lived. The prison AI chimed again, louder this time, unauthorized release detected. Defense protocols activating. Red lights flared, and distant doors slammed shut. Marcus cursed under his breath, realizing they had only minutes to escape. He helped Siren to her feet, lifted her as she leaned on him for support, and motioned for Lyra to stay close. They ran through the corridors, alarms echoing around them, automated turrets waking from sleep. His pilot radioed in enemy systems were activating around the ship, and docking locks had re-engaged. They had broken through the silence of Pandora 6, but now the prison intended to keep them there forever. As Marcus ran, heart pounding, carrying the woman he'd saved and chased by machines meant to erase truth, he realized something powerful. This mission had never been about rules or orders, it had been about doing what was right. And in a galaxy where right and wrong were often buried under war, fear, and silence, that choice still mattered more than anything. Alarms screamed through the metal corridors of Pandora 6. Marcus Hale ran with Serenade leaning against his side and Lyra close behind, her small feet silent on the cold floor, her eyes wide with fear, but steady with purpose. The ancient prison had awakened, its defense systems slow but ruthless, activating turrets and lockdown sequences that had not been used in years. Marcus's communicator crackled as the pilot's voice came through, warning that external cannons had come online and the docking clamps had sealed the scout ship in place. Time was slipping through their hands, and escape was becoming harder with every second. The corridors twisted and split, but the AIS cold voice guided security drones toward them, forcing Marcus to make quick, risky turns deeper into the complex. He didn't know the full layout of the prison, but he knew it was built to confuse and trap intruders. He needed a way to disable the main defense system, just long enough to get Siren and Lyra on the ship. Siren, still weak from cryo-sleep, whispered about a control room, an old command node used by the original builders of the prison during construction. It was not far from their current path, buried beneath the power core, likely forgotten by even the automated guards. It was a gamble, but Marcus had no choice. With Siren barely able to walk, he lifted her onto his back and signaled Lyra to stay close as they descended a narrow stairwell into the lowest level of the moon. Dust and darkness swallowed them, and only the soft glow from Lyra's handlight showed the way forward. At the base, they found the control chamber rusted, cold, untouched for decades, but still functional. Marcus placed Siren gently on the floor beside a panel and began scanning the controls. The interface was in a mix of old human code and Threxel symbols, and it took all of Marcus's training to recognize a system override terminal. As he worked, Lyra stood beside her mother, holding her hand, quiet but firm, as if her presence alone gave Siren the strength to breathe. Sparks flew from the console as Marcus bypassed one lock after another, fingers flying across the keys, sweat dripping down his temple. The main screen blinked, then responded. Primary defense protocol paused. Manual override active. A brief window had opened. He had less than 3 minutes before the system rebooted and sealed them all in again. Marcus turned to them, his voice calm but urgent. "We go now." Siren nodded, eyes burning with determination despite her weakness. They moved fast, retracing their path, sprinting now through corridors that had fallen eerily silent again. The AI, confused by the override, had lost track of them, and the remaining drones surged in the wrong direction. When they reached the docking bay, Marcus saw the scout ship waiting, its engines prepped and its lights blinking for takeoff. But the docking clamps were still locked tight. The pilot shouted through the comm, "Manual release only. You need to do it by hand." Marcus handed Siren into the pilot's arms at the bottom of the ramp and turned to run toward the control booth. Lyra tugged at his sleeve. "I'll help," she said, her voice soft but sure. He hesitated, then nodded. Together, they climbed a side ladder to the release panel. Heavy levers and ancient wiring greeted them. Marcus pushed with all his strength, his muscles burning, the metal groaning under the pressure. Lyra reached out, touching a nearby panel covered in Threxel script, and pressed a series of symbols Marcus didn't understand. Suddenly, the clamps hissed, and the ship jolted as it was freed. "Good work," Marcus whispered as they slid back down. The boarding ramp began to rise, and Marcus grabbed Lyra, lifting her as he ran the final steps. Behind them, lights flared. Security bots had returned, too late but still dangerous. A laser bolt struck the wall beside Marcus as he leapt onto the ramp, rolling into the safety of the cargo bay just as the doors sealed shut. The ship launched into the sky, climbing through layers of frozen atmosphere as the prison below fired. Weakly, its cannons to slow, its systems to broken to stop them. Inside the ship, Siren pulled Lyra into her arms, her tears falling silently as Marcus collapsed in a chair, heart pounding, muscles aching, but soul alive with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The danger was not over, but for now, they were free. The pilot set a course away from the restricted zone, activating stealth protocols to avoid patrols. Marcus sat beside Siren, and she looked at him with gratitude so deep it needed no words. "You risked everything for us," she said softly. Marcus shrugged, smiling faintly. She needed her mother. That was enough. Lyra, now resting with her head on Siren's lap, opened her eyes and whispered, "You heard my song." Marcus blinked. "What?" "The dream. I sang in it," she said. "That's why you came." He stared at her, stunned. The dream that had haunted him before the mission, the crying child in the cave, it hadn't been just a dream. He didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. Somehow, across the darkness of space, something had called to him, and he had answered. The silence of Penteris Ix had been broken not by force, but by the quiet love of a mother and daughter, and the choice of one human soldier who still believed that compassion mattered in a universe drowning in war. The ship drifted through deep space, hidden behind layers of stealth coating and signal dampeners, but inside, the air was heavy with silence and thought, as if everyone aboard knew the path ahead would not be easy. Marcus Hale stood by the viewport, watching the stars, his reflection staring back at him with tired eyes and a mind still racing from everything they had just escaped. Behind him, Siren sat with Lyra resting in her lap, gently brushing the girl's hair as if afraid she might vanish if left alone for even a second. Though Siren had regained some strength since leaving the prison, her mind still carried the weight of years in darkness. Locked away without trial, without hope, she had asked no questions at first, only held her daughter and whispered things in her language that Marcus didn't understand but felt deeply. Now, the time for hiding was over. They couldn't run forever. Marcus knew that returning to civilized space meant consequences. He had broken orders, stolen a ship, entered a classified facility, and rescued a prisoner labeled as a political threat. But he also knew the truth was more powerful than the lie it threatened. Serenale was not a threat. She was a voice silenced for speaking peace, and Lyra was a living reminder of everything war tried to erase. As the ship approached the outer edge of Threxel space, Marcus prepared a transmission, one that would bypass military channels and go straight to public networks, showing files, video footage, and live proof that Siren was alive and wrongly imprisoned. He didn't ask for permission. He simply sent it. Within hours, the galaxy began to respond. News channels scrambled for details. Political leaders demanded answers, and the Threxel High Council, long scattered and quiet, called an emergency assembly. Marcus, Siren, and Lyra were escorted by neutral forces to a secure space station where no weapons were allowed, only words. The hearing was watched by billions across multiple systems, human and alien alike. Siren stood before them, with her daughter beside her, and told her story, how she tried to stop the war, how her warnings were ignored, and how she was taken and hidden to silence her voice. Lyra's presence small, silent, but strong, moved hearts in ways no speech could, and Marcus, when asked why he did it, simply said, "Because she mattered. And because we forgot how to care." The council fell silent after that. Days passed. Then the verdict came. Siren was cleared of all charges, her record wiped clean, and a formal apology was made by both human and Threxel governments. What followed surprised everyone. Siren was offered a position as a peace advisor between species, and she accepted, on the condition that her daughter remained safe and free, never again hidden or hunted. Marcus was not punished. Instead, he was reassigned not as a soldier, but as a diplomatic guardian, a bridge between worlds, working with Siren to heal the damage done by war. Some called him a hero. Others called him reckless. He didn't care. What mattered to him was the quiet moments, Lyra learning to laugh again, drawing pictures in the halls of the Peace Council building, humming the melody that once saved her life. There was still tension across the stars, and not every voice welcomed this new chapter, but the change had begun. Siren's return had sparked something greater than any battle, the idea that peace was still possible. In time, new alliances formed, treaties were written, and old enemies began to speak again, not with weapons, but with cautious hope. Marcus never forgot the cold halls of Penrith Ix or the silence that lived there, but now, when he stood by the windows and watched the stars, he saw something new in them, not emptiness, but promise. And somewhere far across the galaxy, a little girl who once wouldn't speak now told her story to others, reminding them that even in the darkest places, light could still break through. The future they had created wasn't planned. It wasn't expected, but it was real, and it belonged to them now.